SpongeGex here, and I just saw Kung Fu Panda 4. I've never reviewed the previous Kung Fu Panda movies, but just know that they are some of my favorite DreamWorks films. The first movie looked so stupid when it was first announced, but I saw it after seeing the great reviews it had back in 2007, and I loved it less for its silly humor and more for its visuals, action, music, drama, and characters. It was a great movie about finding greatness in oneself, along with finding it in the most unlikely of places. The second one was the best in my opinion, being a much darker and more dramatic story, revealing Poe's heartbreaking story. The scenes with Poe and his adoptive father were great as well, not to mention the more intimidating villain with Lord Shen. Also, that reveal at the end that Poe's birth dad survived the panda genocide along with a few others. It left the perfect setup for a third entry, and I'd be lying if I didn't admit I found Kung Fu Panda 3 a bit underwhelming, especially after the greatness that was the second one, which just had a much more mature tone with a more threatening villain. The third felt very toned down in comparison. It went back to treating Poe like a useless joke, and the main villain was the weakest out of all four films. And the Furious Five were barely in it. The only good things I have to say about the third one is Poe reuniting with his dad. I mean, Lee was such a fun character, even though they did dumb him down compared to how Kung Fu Panda 2 made him to sound more like a badass, and the animation was more vibrant, and the scene with Poe reuniting with Oogway in the spirit realm was a nice addition. Other than that, I found the whole Panda Village and finding your chi storyline to be pretty weak and forgettable. The third wasn't a bad movie, just a huge step backwards from the development from the second film. Now, I know since the release of Kung Fu Panda 3, there were two additional TV shows, one on Amazon Prime that took place in the Panda Village, and another one that released on Netflix, which looked terrible. It felt more like a standalone show that rewrote the characters and retconned any past events. Now, I have not seen any of these, and honestly, I have no desire to either, because I figured they would be as underwhelming as the Nickelodeon series, Kung Fu Panda Legends of Awesomeness, where none of the episodes felt canon to the movies, nor did they contain the same quality in nearly every category. This lack of feeling consistent with the movies is what really made me nervous about Kung Fu Panda 4. After the release of Kung Fu Panda 3, I was hoping they'd make another. I mean, it was obvious that they were going to make more, since DreamWorks stated previously that they had enough stories to tell 7 films. So, the third movie sold and reviewed well, so it was no brainer that there was going to be a fourth at least. But I didn't think it would take about 8 years later to release. It was an even longer release gap than 2 and three's releases. Kung Fu Panda 4's plot, description, and previews made me even more nervous. It just looked underwhelming, and it had a few neat ideas, but despite my concerns, though, I can gladly say Kung Fu Panda 4 was much more enjoyable than what the previews led on, but there are still a few underwhelming elements, so there are going to be spoilers ahead, so you've been warned. The biggest complaint I and many others have with this movie is the lack of previous characters. The Furious Five are not part of this story, despite how they were a huge part of at least the first 2 films. There's a part in the movie where Poe says he's going on another quest, and when a kid asks Poe if the Furious Five will join him, Poe breaks it to the kids that the Five spread across the land for different missions or reasons. In other words, the writers were either too lazy to find better roles for these characters, DreamWorks wanted to cut costs on rehiring voice actors, or the animators just didn't want to bother animating more characters, so they wrote them out. They do show up briefly during the end credits, but no voice lines, unfortunately. A trend I've noticed with too many movies lately, especially from Marvel movies, which is the theme of passing down the torch. I mean, I guess you could say this kind of started with Cars 3, but Kung Fu Panda 4 copies this trope as Shifu gives Poe his final mission to find his successor, pass down the role of Dragon Warrior to someone else so he can take Oogway's place as Master of Wisdom. Poe, of course, isn't ready for such a drastic change and wants to keep his position as Dragon Warrior so he can keep fighting crime and protecting the valley. Aside from bringing back Poe's birth dad Lee, who is now living and working at Ping's Noodle Shop, the sequel mostly ignores the events from Kung Fu Panda 3. The Jade Palace is somehow back despite how it was destroyed in the third one, and it seems Poe and Lee abandoned the Panda Village without any explanation on if they left someone else in charge of the place. Unless one of the Kung Fu Panda TV shows made that explanation, but like I said, I didn't watch that. Meanwhile, a new villain emerges, being a sorceress named the Chameleon, who can shapeshift into anyone she wants. However, she can't copy the abilities of the people she copies, and that's something that she wishes to gain. The Chameleon was a character who was more cool for her abilities and appearance. Otherwise, she was a rather boring villain. She was at least better than the villain from the third film, but she mostly just felt like another clone of Lord Shen. She was just a villain wannabe, basically. And so, meanwhile, Poe finds a thievius fox named Shen, voiced by Aquafina, stealing from the Jade Palace. Again, how is this place and all of its artifacts back in one piece? I thought this was destroyed, but after a fight and chase, Poe traps Jen and arrests her, but Jen reveals that she knows where to find the chameleon, and Poe decides to trust her into helping him find the chameleon, with the promise of finding a way to reduce her sentence if they get back. As they adventure off, we get a silly side plot of Poe's dad's following Poe's trail for his safety. The movie feels like two road trip movies happening at once, one with Poe and Jen and the other with Poe's dads. Now, this plot is very predictable. It's a movie about Poe having to learn to accept change and pass his duties on to a worthy successor. Gee, the previews show him constantly being paired with a fox throughout. I wonder who he's going to pass it down to. Also, it wasn't a surprise that Jen was working for the chameleon all along and was only at the Jade Palace in the beginning to lure Poe into the chameleon's trap all along. The chameleon wanted the scepter Oogway bestowed to Poe so she could use its powers to bring back fallen warriors, steal their kung fu abilities, and basically become ruler of the world, yada yada. She brings back all of Poe's past foes and steals their powers. Unfortunately, they did not get J.K. Simmons or Gary Oldman back to reprise their roles, but they did get Ian McShane to reprise as the voice of Tai Lung, so that was nice. Chameleon knocks Poe off a cliff and Jen is horrified. Poe gets saved by his dads as Poe marches back to fight the chameleon. Of course, Jen feels terrible for betraying Poe and helps him fight off the chameleon. I did think the friendship between Poe and Jen felt both rushed and forced. I didn't feel like it gave reasons for her to truly have a change of heart, but I did enjoy the part where she tries explaining herself and apologizing to Poe, but he has no reason to trust her anymore, so he's just trying to ignore her, and she desperately fights Poe, trying to protect him from getting killed by the chameleon, eventually leading to her hugging him and begging him not to go, and, yeah, that was nice. Poe was trying to teach her throughout the film that there are better ways to solve conflicts than fighting, and that was her desperate attempt of showing how much he means to her, and as Poe marches off to fight the chameleon, Jen and Poe's dads recruit a bunch of underground thieves to fight off the guards to help Poe out. I feel like that whole subplot really led to nothing. We barely see the criminals coming back to help fight. It happens a little bit, but it doesn't really seem to have a good payoff or anything. We get a fun and visually stunning final battle as Poe and Jen fight off the chameleon as she keeps transforming into different warriors with each attack she pulls off. Eventually, she fuses into a monstrous hybrid of all of them, turning her into a beastly dragon. And for her final transformation, she turns into a copy of Poe, making for one of Poe's toughest fights yet. As cool as this fight was, I did think the way the chameleon was defeated felt too abrupt and a bit anticlimactic. Poe gets trapped and hands his staff to Jen, choosing her to finish the fight, and she ends up defeating the chameleon in just one blow. But Poe reveals he was faking being trapped all along just to show that Jen had potential all along and she just needed to believe in herself, and Poe delivers the final blow on the chameleon. Upon all the villains witnessing Poe defeating the villain who stole their powers, they all bow in respect, and Tai Lung admits that maybe Oogway chose the correct dragon warrior after all, as they all return back to the spirit realm, as Tai Lung drags the chameleon in with them. As our heroes return home, Poe chooses Jen to be trained to be the next dragon warrior, but just like Oogway before him, Shifu is once again puzzled by his new master's choice in dragon warrior, but Poe assures her that he'll come around to her. During the credits, we see Poe called the Furious Five to come back to train alongside Jen, and that was Kung Fu Panda 4. A very predictable sequel, but it does a great job at going full circle with many nods and callbacks to moments that made the first three films great. I wouldn't mind seeing a Kung Fu Fox spin-off sequel, with Poe gaining more wisdom as his new master role, while seeing Jen learning from the Furious Five, teaming up with them and tackling new villains or something. It could make for a fun spin-off, if written right. Overall, Kung Fu Panda 4 does feel like a sequel that didn't have to be made, but it was still fun to watch, even if it was missing a lot from the first three films. But I guess those changes match the film's message about how things in life are always changing, and we just need to accept them. I'd give the movie a 7 out of 10. It's better than Kung Fu Panda 3, but not as great as the first two. That's all I have to show for now. Thank you for watching. See you next time, and have a great day.